14 major differences and subtle modifications between Tolkien's books and the Rings of Power. Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Terry and this is Marvelous Videos. The extensive lore created by J.R.R. Tolkien is no less than a modern literary marvel, and it's not surprising that from books to movies to TV shows, the narrative has captured a vast audience. The fans have been excited about the new Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power series, because this big-budget venture by Amazon promised a fresh perspective to the familiar lore. Now that the first 2 episodes are here, we can see that the narrative dares to try out a few major departures from the main storyline. Contrary to what many expected, the story isn't that of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. In fact, the showrunners Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne have pulled up a variety of Tolkien's work to create something that will appeal to the fans as well as newcomers. They've been inspired by the appendices of The Lord of the Rings and other Tolkien works like the Silmarillion to curate the narrative, and so far, the show has been nothing short of spectacular. In this video, we'll bring you some of the major differences and also explore the little things that relate to some of the bigger events in the books. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The narrative isn't taken from any one book. It's been clearly established that the Rings of Power is set during the Second Age of Middle-earth. This age is characterized by some major events that include the rise and fall of the Kingdom of Númenor and also the forging of the Great Rings. Some of these events aren't exactly available in written form with specific details, but there is a condensed timeline that's captured in Appendix B of The Lord of the Rings, which is also called The Tale of Years. While the showrunners are mostly drawing inspiration from The Tale of Years, they're enjoying a lot of creative liberty to determine the storyline or introduce some new characters. They've revealed in an interview that their scrutiny of some of Tolkien's other major works also helped them fill some of the gaps. There are some major hints in certain songs that the characters sing or the stories that they tell each other, and these are being used to get some clarity on what exactly happened during the Second Age. Tolkien's entire mythology is deeply connected in spite of its extensive nature, and the die-hard fans will spot the subtle references to the Silmarillion as well, which talks about the creation of Middle-earth and certain events of the First Age. The fourth part of the Silmarillion, titled Akallabeth, is premised in the Second Age, and there's a possibility that we'll get to see some version of it in the show. The major issue here is that Amazon doesn't have rights over a lot of Tolkien's works. In fact, the showrunners revealed in an interview that they only have the rights to The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Return of the King, The Appendices, and The Hobbit. While this does take away a huge chunk of the main story, the creative heads have used up the tiniest of clues from all their Tolkien reading to set a roadmap for the series. Galadriel, the center of the storytelling. The first and second episode has offered enough to suggest that Galadriel will be one of the leading protagonists in the show. The makers rush through her early life, but she's clearly established as a fierce warrior and commander who's determined to fulfill the wishes of her fallen brother and destroy Sauron. This version of Galadriel isn't the one that the fans are familiar with. She's completely different from the Galadriel you see in Lord of the Rings, and rightly so because she hasn't matured yet. There's a hint of pride, arrogance, and overconfidence followed by some sort of righteousness in her character that fans haven't encountered before. She's yet to evolve as the person most know her to be in the Third Age. There are enough indications to suggest that her character will grow as the story proceeds, but her underlying determination to root out the evil of Sauron will probably continue to prevail. The books project her as someone who's a lot more relaxed and mature during her time in Doriath, the Elven realm. This is also where she met her husband, Celeborn. But we are witnessing an earlier timeline in this series. That being said, Tolkien's writing does present her as someone who dares to seek out adventure and power, and the actions of the character in the series are certainly in line with this premise. Her mannerisms and heroics make her fit right into the world of Tolkien's great heroes, and we'll have to wait and watch how the creators deal with this character going ahead. If the deep, engaging conversations between Elrond and Galadriel are considered, he's probably going to be the one to help her transform into her mature state. We see a side of Elrond that hasn't reached his true potential. Elrond's appearance was as interesting as it was surprising, and the hardcore fans will know that the version of Elrond that we see in the series is quite different from the one in the books. His first scene shows him being informed that he can't attend a particular council meeting because it's only for elves, and it's ironic considering the kind of influence he would have in the future, in one of the most important councils. His friendship with Galadriel, however, is heartening to witness, and their conversations are one of the highlights of the episode in terms of dialogue. That being said, we're certainly not on the same page as Galadriel when it comes to calling Elrond a politician, because he's anything but that. Also, the showrunners touched the right nerve during one particular conversation between Galadriel and Elrond, where both claim to have witnessed some terrible things. This is a nod to the fact that Galadriel watched the destruction of the two trees and experienced the loss of 3 of her brothers at the hands of Morgoth. Meanwhile, Elrond himself isn't short on tragedies, because he's been through the traumatic experience of kinslaying, which separated him from his parents very early in his life. If we're guessing in the right direction, we'll see Elrond evolve just as much as Galadriel in the show, because he should also achieve a level of influence and command that we are yet to see so far. Finrod and his glorious tales that the show avoided. The Rings of Power series makes a constant effort to amend the lack of availability of rights to certain crucial books. The makers try valiantly to strike a balance between what they can't show, subtle imagery to appeal to the book fans, and also interest the new audiences who aren't familiar with the lore. One of these efforts can be seen in the character of Finrod, Galadriel's brother. In her narrative, she reveals that her brother had sought to seek out the evil Sauron and destroy him. This isn't in line with Finrod's story from the books, even though his enmity with Sauron is understandable from Tolkien's work. Sauron had destroyed and taken over Finrod's fortress in Middle-earth, but his goals were not really so restricted as to defeat Sauron. In fact, some better clarity is offered when you take a closer look at his dead body, which bears some deep claw marks apart from Sauron's signature inflicted through a wound. The story reveals that Sauron found Finrod first, and his lifeless body bears signs of his canon death from all the wolves in the dungeons of Sauron's fortress. Another possible story arc suggests that Finrod didn't go down without a proper fight. In fact, in the original source, Sauron doesn't really imprint his signs on the flesh of his victims. In the Silmarillion, Finrod and his companions were taken prisoner by Sauron. He wasn't the Dark Lord yet, but he was still powerful enough to kill them off one by one using werewolves. Finrod protects one of his companions from a deadly werewolf attack, but he's severely injured and succumbs to his wounds. The deep scratch marks on his body in the Rings of Power might also indicate to this fate, and it all adds up. It's slightly unfortunate that the valor and courage of this iconic warrior couldn't be captured to its full potential in the series.
Clear and clear.
The Harfoots of Rhovanion, the early ancestors of the Hobbits. While the showrunners had the luxury of making use of some familiar elf, human and dwarf characters courtesy of access to the appendices, they had to resort to their own creations when it came to hobbits. J.D. Payne has spoken about how Tolkien wrote about 3 different breeds of hobbits, the Harfoots, Fallowhides and Stors. The brief description that the author provided for Harfoots, painting them as short and nimble folk who preferred highlands and hillsides, bodes well for the Harfoots we see in this series. They come across as a nomadic tribe living in the land of Rhovanion, who keep to themselves and remain hidden from much of the outside world. They're experts in camouflage and somehow have enough skills to sustain themselves in the wilderness. The interaction between the hunters who cross the Harfoot land shows how the lack of interaction with the outside world has defined the Harfoots as magical, intimidating creatures, whereas in reality they're anything but harmful. The creators had to resort to a lot of creative liberty, but with interesting Harfoot characters like Nori Brandyfoot and Poppy Proudfellow, the fans aren't complaining. In fact, many are reminded of the equation between Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee. The fans will remember that this was the pair to destroy the One Ring, and although the showrunners have refused to draw parallels, it does seem like Nori and Poppy might have a major role to play going ahead. The Harfoots that we've seen so far have not yet evolved into the life of luxuries that their descendants enjoy in the Third Age, and it might be a fun transformation to watch.
We thought our light would never dim.
The hurried portrayal of the destruction of the two trees of Valinor, one of the slightly disappointing moments during the otherwise amazing narrative of the first two episodes, comes during the first few moments when the story really rushes through a lot too quickly. Some crucial things can't be depicted because of the lack of rights mentioned earlier, and one such moment was the destruction of the two trees of Valinor. Before the sun, the light from the trees was enough to sustain the world until the evil of Melkor cast its spell of destruction. While the narrative breezes through these crucial details in a matter of seconds, we miss out on watching the gigantic spider Ungoliant destroy the trees. Projecting the destroyed city as a wasteland isn't exactly in line with the image created in the books, which suggests that it was if someone simply turned off the lights in this land. The subtle referencing to the Great Wars. During Galadriel's narrative in the initial parts of the first episode, she states that a legion of elves went to fight Morgoth and his evil forces. There's a glimpse of elves in thousands of ships setting sail towards Middle-earth, but the makers have to compromise on some more crucial details. They're unable to see some iconic moments from the books, such as the burning of the ships or the remarkable crossing of the Helcaraxi. Enjoy some references to the artwork behind the crossing of the Helcaraxi when Galadriel and the soldiers under her command move through a blizzard in the darkness hunting for Sauron. Coming back to the war, we see the great eagles flying alongside the ships, and the next time we see them is again for another split second when they appear fighting what appears to be a dragon. This scene shows a dragon taking down an eagle during the events of the war, and it's a good indication of how the memorable battles had some tough lessons for the good guys. The scenes of the war, where we see Finrod and an entire army of elves in a furious battle, are actually a combination of all the wars in the First Age. Depicting this as a single fight that lasted centuries doesn't do justice to the detail that the fans are familiar with, but it's understandable considering the lack of time or resources to put it all together. There's also a subtle reference to the Hill of the Slain in the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears in the First Age. Here, the mound was created by all the fallen soldiers, both men and elves, and in Rings of Power, we see Galadriel picking up a dented helmet after the war and adding it to a mound of innumerable helmets. The narrative reveals that while the elves didn't have a word for death before, they now have several, and this was a smart shout out to those die-hard fans who would get the hint.
But you need never see them again.
The deal with Erondir. This is one of the many original characters created for the show The Rings of Power, and Erondir has established his presence as an impactful character already. He's one of the elf soldiers tasked with watching over a group of people whose ancestors had sided with the Dark Lord during the epic battle. Erondir has been performing his duty for the last 1,000 years, but of late he's developed a soft spot for a woman named Bronwyn, a human healer. His fellow soldier knows about his feelings, and he warns him about the dire consequences of previous human-elf pairings. This seems to be some sort of an exaggeration, because it's a stretch to suggest that the previous two instances of romance between an elf and a human ended terribly. The story of Arwen and Aragorn didn't really have a tragic ending just because Arwen chose mortal life. They got to spend the rest of their lives in Middle-earth, and it's unfair to say that things went horribly wrong. The other instance of elf-human romance dates back to the First Age, when Beren and Luthien fell for each other. Even their love had a similar fate after much struggle, and they got to spend their last days together as mortals. Thus, the comment made by Erondir's fellow soldier doesn't sit in line with Tolkien's work, and we have to wait and see what becomes of the subtle love story developing between Erondir and Bronwyn.
Purpose of your visit, you want something.
I journeyed here to see my friend whom I've greatly missed.
Missed? You missed my wedding.
Have elves and dwarves been friends before? This is one question that has been bothering the new audience introduced to Tolkien's fascinating world. In The Rings of Power, we've seen an adorable bond of friendship between Elrond and Durin IV. While the show highlights their close friendship, it hasn't yet established how it all started. This in turn has left many wondering if the original works have such instances, and the answer is both yes and no. Well, historically, elves and dwarves do not have a great record of being friends. The animosity is deep-rooted in their creation, where the elves are considered to be the eldest children of Ilúvatar, the supreme being in Tolkien's fantasy world. Initially, men were supposed to be second, but Aule, one of the Valar, created the dwarves in the mountains of Middle-earth. He wasn't permitted by Ilúvatar to create life, but after witnessing the dwarves he took pity and allowed them to sleep for hundreds of years. Eventually they awoke after almost a century following the elves, and their inherently different nature probably sowed the seeds of hate. Their appearances are strikingly different because Aule, the creator of the dwarfs, didn't know about the actual design of the elves even though he wanted to replicate them. While elves are immortal beings, dwarves have an average life expectancy of around 300 years. In the series, we see how Durin IV is upset with his friend Elrond for missing some of the major events in his life, spanning over 20 years. While this is almost like the blink of an eye for an elf, a dwarf has lived a significant part of his life in this time. The narrative doesn't establish when the two met or how they became friends, but it could be during the course of the War of Wrath, where Elrond fought alongside the dwarfs. Besides, Elrond spent a significant amount of time in Eregion, a realm once ruled by Galadriel. As Eregion is close to Khazad-dûm, the land of King Durin, Elrond could have met him during one of his visits. In The Lord of the Rings, we've seen Legolas and Gimli develop a special bond that broke the stereotype about the rivalry between elves and dwarves. That being said, the two races do share a turbulent history of conflict which is largely related to their status. Tolkien's works have established that the dwarves and elves also worked together briefly in the early days of Middle-earth, and since both races are inherently good, it doesn't seem too hard to believe. How Elrond and Durin's friendship develops through the show, only time will tell, but it's not completely out of line when it comes to Tolkien's works. The reference to Aule is related to the books. As stated before, Aule is the creator of the dwarves, and he did so without the permission of Ilúvatar, the higher power. Obviously, the dwarves over the ages have maintained a strong connection with Aule, and it's revealed when Durin IV greets Elrond. It all starts after Elrond expects to be greeted gloriously in the land of the dwarfs, and his expectations are proven wrong. It turns out that Durin held a grudge against his friend for ignoring him in the last 20 years and missing some major events of his life. When they're engaged in the contest of Sigyn Tarag, alternately breaking giant rocks with the first one to fail losing, Durin mentions that the contest was developed by Aule. This is also the first mention of one of the Valar. In fact, Sigyn Tarag is a phrase coined by Tolkien and it means longbeards, which also refers to the clan of the dwarves. All about the mysterious Comet Man. We have already spoken about some of the new characters introduced in the show, and the sudden appearance of a mysterious giant meteor man simply adds more spice to the tale. It's easily one of the weirdest moments in the show when Nori, the half-foot girl, witnesses a man crash landing outside their settlement. This raggedy man seems extremely weak and deranged, and Nori nurses him back to better health after saving his life and keeping him hidden from the Half-Foot clan. But who could this mystery man be? One theory suggests that there could be something evil about this man. If you remember the scene where he crash lands, he comes down with what looks like blazing stones and lava-like substances. However, Nori soon discovers that these things aren't hot and they don't burn her when she comes in contact. In the first episode, when Galadriel and her men enter the hideout of the orcs, she remarked how the place was so evil that not even their torches could emit heat. Considering this, something similar might be taking place here, and the mysterious meteor man might even be Sauron in disguise. A more plausible and realistic theory is that he's a wizard with special powers, and he'll have a role to play in the events to follow. Some even theorize that he could be Gandalf, because it's been stated in Tolkien's works that Gandalf, being one of the angelic spirits, could visit Middle-earth when he pleased. He could well be one of the Blue Wizards, and given their lack of history, it would provide a perfect opportunity for the creators to develop a story around him. Whatever his mystery identity may be, it's surely going to be revealed in the following episodes.
A gift I have decided to refuse.
Galadriel's refusal to accept Valinor. Anyone who watched the first episode of Rings of Power must have enjoyed the moment when Galadriel gives up the opportunity to travel into the Undying Lands. She and her fellow soldiers were awarded by the king for their heroic efforts in seeking out Sauron, and they all sailed for the divine light of the land of the gods. At the very last moment, Galadriel backs out because she wants to continue with her mission of finding Sauron, who she believes is still out there somewhere. While elves are immortal, they're not indestructible, and when an elf is killed in battle, the spirit travels to a place in Valinor. It's a prized land that only the rarest ones get an opportunity to enter. So, is this action in line with what Tolkien had penned down for Galadriel? Also, let's be clear that in the books, the process of riding into the light in a boat isn't exactly the process for elves to reach Valinor. In Unfinished Tales, which was compiled by Tolkien's son based on his partially legible notes, Galadriel actually wanted to depart from Valinor to reach Middle-earth and test her true skills. The Heavenly Land felt like a prison for her, and Tolkien even went on to hail her as one of the greatest of her tribe. Initially, the war against Morgoth offered her the opportunity to leave Valinor, and later, she showed almost no desire to head back. While the series isn't exactly picking up on these details, it has to be said that the portrayal is a fairly accurate one. It's believed that she's Tolkien's only character who was created for Middle-earth. She desired power, but never allowed herself to become corrupted. It's exciting to see her evolve as one of the protagonists in the show, and we'll be hoping that the showrunners will do justice to her glorious lore in Tolkien's works. Who is the shipwrecked man and the mysterious creature that Galadriel encounters? Another new character is the equivalent to yet another mystery. The Rings of Power doesn't shy away from these new additions, and Halbrand is certainly one of the most exciting ones. After jumping from the boat in order to evade entering Valinor, Galadriel was left to swim through vast stretches of the ocean. She was lucky to come across a group of shipwrecked folk who offered her shelter briefly before being attacked by an underwater creature. Tolkien's lore refers to this creature as the fish dragon, so let's consider this monster to be simply interested in destruction for now. After the shipwrecked people are attacked, Halbrand is the only survivor because he sets off in his own raft. He even helps Galadriel up onto his raft, and together they not only survive the deadly creature, but also a furious storm. But who could this mystery man be? He clearly mentions earlier that looks can be deceiving, and later states that he's keeping some crucial secrets. He could be the evil Sauron in disguise for all we know, and it could be a ploy to confuse Galadriel or mislead her. At the same time, he also saved Galadriel from certain death, so there could be a very different story arc in store for him.
And a legion of elves went to war.
The books have clearly defined the elves as being masters of certain advanced arts that seem like magic to others. Basically, their enhanced knowledge enables them to create seemingly magical objects or perform certain miraculous actions that come off as magical powers to others. The Rings of Power, however, hardly focus on these powers of the elves. For instance, when Galadriel and her men enter the mysterious fortress, where the orcs had gathered after the defeat of Morgoth, there are times when you almost hope for something magical from the elves. Knocking down the walls to the secret passageway with a punch doesn't have the same charm as it would if they'd used some magic there. Even the action-packed encounter with a snow troll left the fans hoping for more because it was far too quick and only did enough to portray the heroics of Galadriel. Some magic would have been a great addition to the show, and we hope that the future episodes end this disappointment for us. A few final words. The Rings of Power has been praised by most critics and die-hard fans, and it's safe to say that the new series has been quite impressive so far. Of course, it's got some unfair hate due to all the new bits and innovations, but we believe that the true nature of an adaptation doesn't have to shy away from creativity. As long as the creators are respecting the source material and bringing us an interesting storyline, there are no reasons to complain, and we'll be waiting eagerly for the upcoming episodes. Do let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on the show and what you think about the subtle references or changes from the books. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.